Yeah. I'm gonna go over
What did you wrong?
What'd you say?
At least it's only whatever. At least it's only pepper steak. Could have been the That's only the second one I've got from the police department. Don't even play with that stuff, Terry. Put that away. Thank you. Is it expired?
So I made the last one.
Yeah. You took the last one?
I've seen it. Do you want this one, Mark?
That's not too bad. So we had to all turn it back in and get different. You're better off building a house one time.
I'm tired. It's been a long day. It's been a long day.
Well, let's see. But I'm going to eat something. Yeah, that's, and I don't know.
Thank you.
Generally speaking.
Well. We're going to call this meeting to order. This is an electric rate workshop. That is the reason for the meeting. There is no voting at a workshop, so this is strictly informational and educational. It is 6 p.m. Thursday, March the 10th. And I will ask Ms. Jones to call the roll. Where's Ms. Jones?
She went to go make coffees.
Okay, so I'm going to call the roll. Mayor Robinson is not with us tonight. I'm Deborah Jones. Vice President Marguerite Robinson. Here. Councilmember Darkness Hines. Here. Councilmember Michael Cox.
Here.
Councilmember Ellie Hugh Ross.
Here.
City Manager Jackie Gorman.
Here.
City Attorney Scott Walker. That was good time. Mr. Walker and Ms. Baloo are not with us this evening. And Finance Director Stephen Bloom.
Here.
And all other staff.
Here.
Thank you all for coming. We're going to stand at this time for the opening prayer and the pledge of allegiance with no flag. Face that way. And if you will, bow with me for prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this gathering tonight of people who are concerned about the city of Williston and the future that it holds. And all things we pray that you guide us and get us all in the right direction, whatever it may be. In Christ's name we pray, amen.
Amen.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, to start our meeting off tonight, we are starting with Florida Municipal Power Association. We have with us tonight Mr. Jacob Williams, who is the General Manager and CEO of Florida of FMPA. We also have Ms. Sharon Adams, who is the Chief HR and Member Services Coordinator, or Officer, should I say. Okay, we're going to turn it over. We have a presentation. We have the PowerPoint slides. He's going to present those to you as well. He is not Mr. McCleary, by the way.
All right. Well, thank you all for the opportunity to be here tonight to address, help give a little information that will help you out in terms of the electric system we have. But we all recognize right now, the country and the world is in an energy crisis in terms of prices and all that. So
Closer to the mic.
get closer to the mic, he said. All
Yes,
right.
please.
Thank you.
All right.
You may have to raise it up.
That's it. That's it.
Is it all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is this better? All right, very good. So before we get into drive down to the level of Williston's electricity system, which you guys are blessed to have such a low-cost electric utility because of the purchase power that you all have. I'd like to talk about what's driving changes in the pricing and the cost right now. So with that, let's see if this goes forward.
Is that the PDF? Just scroll down.
Just scroll down. Okay, there we go. Okay.
Touchscreen.
Touchscreen, there we go. All right. A little bit of backdrop, and there are some of the slides in the back there. We all recognize that energy costs around the world, around the United States, are rising right now. Energy is actually driving most of our inflation that we're seeing. Price of food going up is actually driven because energy costs are up, because you got to transport all the food to market and all the things that go on. The problem that we're facing is the world has not increased energy production coming out of COVID to the level it should have, given what's happened. U.S. energy prices are up 70 to 160% over January of 2021. I don't have to tell you that it's $4.40 or so for gasoline right now, and it was in 2021 at the beginning. It was $2 and maybe 20 cents, $2.10. But it's not only gasoline and oil. Oil was at $120 a barrel. 8 months ago, it was at $60 a barrel. If you go back and look at one that's important for you all to think about is natural gas. Natural gas prices have more than doubled in the last year. And you go, why is natural gas important? Obviously, some of you have it for home heating or for your stoves and whatnot. But natural gas supplies 75% of the electricity in the state of Florida. And for us, it's 80% of our electricity comes from natural gas generation. So when natural gas prices double, the prices for all the cities are going up as well. What that means, its real impact, you're seeing an average Florida family paying anywhere from $1,600 to $3,000 more a year, mostly for gasoline, but also for electricity than they did a year ago. That's very real. We all see it. We all know that it affects families dramatically. For Floridians, the price of electricity has jumped since the first of the year for most customers, anywhere from 5 to 15%. All right, and that's because natural gas prices have doubled over a period of time, so the price of electricity is moving up accordingly. That said, Williston, you are in a very good place. Your rates here in Williston are some of the lowest for the residential customers in the state. That's quite a blessing you have here. Your rates in Williston are 17% lower than they were back in 2005. Go find me something that costs less today than it did in 2005. But your electricity prices are indeed lower. One of the things that we'll talk at the end is you can keep your competitive rates. I see how this works now. You can compete your competitive rates, but there are some investments the electric system needs after decades of not investing and all that. We'll talk about that at the end. So there's some adjustments that need to be made, but your rates can still be very competitive after all that because of some of the things that have happened here. Let me jump to the next slide. And this just lays out all the energy prices and how much they've changed since January 1 of 2021. If you think we have problems here in the United States, the price of natural gas in Europe has gone up by 13 times. In the United States, you're seeing, again, prices go up anywhere from 70 to 160%, whether it's oil, gasoline, natural gas, coal, all of them are up because the world is short hydrocarbons. I'd be happy to have an offline discussion about why that's happened, but that would be a whole nother section tonight. But it's just a backdrop that's driving the cost of electricity, because for the most part in the United States, we still make most of our electricity. Right at 60% of our electricity in the United States is made by one of the fossil fuels. In Florida, it's 75% of our electricity comes from natural gas generation. It drives us here in the state. All right. The other thing that's gone on, and we talked a little bit with Mike and found about was the material costs are rising rapidly for the utilities. Aluminum prices are up 80% over what they were in January of 2021. Steel prices are up around 30% over what they were. And copper, you go, why is that important? All the power lines, all the things that go on, all the big transformers, they're all made of steel, copper, and aluminum. And so you're seeing cost increases of all the materials, long lead times, which we'll talk about, but that's the other thing to keep in mind. Before we get down to Wilson's, we'll talk a little bit about, there's 3 major investor-owned utilities in the state. Everybody hears of Florida Power and Light, or Duke. Duke's the one that's around here quite a bit. And then Tampa Electric, TECO is what they call. Each of them increased their rates in January 1 by 13%, 7%, and 14%. Much of that was driven by the blue bar, which is the fuel cost. Others, it's driven by, they're doing what's called storm hardening, preparing for hurricanes, where they've taken up most of their wood poles and they've replaced them with steel and concrete poles so that we don't have issues going forward. Some of the things that need to be considered here in terms of upgrading the poles and whatnot, because wood poles only last 40 years and they rot out. And we'll show you some pictures of what you got here that kind of say there's some things that need to be done. All right, a little bit of history about where Williston's electric prices have been. The blue line represents the Williston's electric rates. The red line is the United States average prices for residential customers, and you can see Williston's rates are 17% lower than they were back in 05, 06 timeframe, while the United States electric prices have risen by 32%. So you buck the trend. Wonderful. The biggest reason for bucking the trend is twofold. One, natural gas prices have stayed low. Remember, the state of Florida is the most dependent on natural gas of any major state in the United States for making electricity. So goes natural gas prices, so goes the price of power and electricity here in Florida. And we benefited from that. So your rates have done very well over the last period of time. You want to compare to your neighbors, Clay Co-op, Seco, Central Florida Co-op. You can see they're all anywhere from 10 to 15, 20% higher. GRU's even higher. Ocala and Duke's the highest in the area. So by any measure, you all are doing have some great rates here in Williston. This is a chart that shows the average price of electricity for 2021 for residential customers. And Williston is the second lowest in the state. Only New Smyrna Beach is lower. And you see that everybody else is to the right. And your rates are, let's say under $100 for an average 1,000 kilowatt customer. That compares extremely well to everybody else. So you're blessed in that position. That was last year's numbers. Now remember, a number of these people, most of the companies here or cities or whatnot, they've all had an increase starting January 1 of this year. So they've moved up already. And that's something that keep in mind. For Williston, one of the biggest things that's helped drive your costs down since 2019 is you signed a brand new power contract with us, with Florida Municipal Power Agency. We're proud to provide you the power. It dropped your costs significantly, anywhere from 15 to 20% over what you were paying previously. All right. Are we okay?
Can somebody close that back door? I believe the cleaning crew is here. That's what it sounds like to me. All I could hear is a vacuum cleaner. I appreciate it. Continue, you're fine.
Okay, all right. This shows the cost for the electric, how the expenses have been for the electric utility. 2019, the red bar was your power cost before you started buying power. 2022 is what we expect for this year, so you can see a big drop in the red bar. The blue bars represent the operating cost of the electric utility, and those costs have went up in part because there's needed investment in the utility here and some other things. The light blue bar in there is how much transfer to the city that the electric utility makes. And then the green bar represents how much the electric utility. Steve will talk a lot more about that, but just to let you know, if you look overall, your costs have come down, and the big driver is the red bar going down, your power cost. And that's, you should be proud of the team that went about selecting a provider. Fortunately, we were selected to do that, and you get save money, and that you have, which is why you have some of the lowest rates in the state today. Okay. The electric utility, all the electric utilities in the state that are owned by a city, we always like to say they're the goose that lays the golden egg for the city. Because usually they transfer a significant amount of dollars to the city. Without the electric utility, those dollars have to come out of tax base. So there are only 33 cities in Florida that own their own electric utility. You're one. Nearest neighbor here, Newberry, GRU, places like that, Ocala as well. So some of the ones in this area, Leesburg and whatnot. Your electric utility generated almost $900,000 of margin last year under the budget. It transferred about $250,000 to the city of that margin. They spent about $120,000 to upgrade the facilities, which need constant maintenance and upgrade. And then about $500,000 was transferred to other utilities here in the city. Again, the electric utility is the goose that keeps laying the golden eggs for the community. Without it, where do you come up with that? Essentially $750,000. It's a question you always want to ask. All right, going up in part because the system needs to be upgraded. Poles only last about 40 years, and then they literally rot to the ground, and they're not safe. This picture here is a pole, one of your poles that was taken out of the ground. It's around a 40-year-old pole, and you think about it, right there is the ground level, and below it, you see how much thinner it is and how much it's been eaten up by termites and whatnot. You have a significant number of poles in this city like that. Any big storm that came through, hurricane that came through, could level those poles, and you'd have to put them all back. It's done you need to do it every 40 years, and you can't say, well, let's defer another 10 years. They'll be on the ground in a big storm at some point. So that's something that the team has been working on to say, we need to start replacing all those things. It's part of fixing roads. It's very common that's done. There's a number of things that need to be done. Unfortunately, right now, cost of all equipment's high. And so you got to plan out and kind of take bites at it. But one of the things that the utility needs to do is have enough money to actually sustain the capital, keep putting it in so the goose can keep laying the golden eggs for you. Because that's what the electric utility does. So anyway, just an idea. We could go through all kinds of stuff, and the team here could tell you all kinds of stories about the things that need to be upgraded and whatnot. But the simple fact is, if you think of a pole, it's sitting in the ground, and these poles are all ground and rotted below the ground. They're not safe for people to get on, frankly. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done to upgrade. We talked a little bit about the facilities that need to be upgraded on the electric utility. Unfortunately, the world energy shortage and the material shortage, which is going on around the world, means cable and wire prices are up 200% over basically 2018-19 period. Again, wire and cable are aluminum, copper, and there's a shortage of that. Transformers are up 65%. We were talking to the guys today, and it would take 2 years to get a transformer for one of those pad mount transformers behind your house or on the lot line. They're as much as 2 years to get them after you should place an order today. So it's the kind of thing you got to be planning and making investments right now. Everyone's in this situation. No one's immune to that. And poles are up a little bit. So the last thing I'll leave with is that the staff here has requested an 8.9% increase this year on the electric rates, which would still leave your rates below everybody in this region, and still one of the lowest rates in the state when it was all said and done. And that would go a long way to start giving you the capital you need to start rebuilding the system. you can't defer forever in the electric side. It's not gonna work. And you need to keep rebuilding, that. And then the small increases thereafter. Steve will talk a lot more about that. I'll leave that to him. So if you took the rates for everybody in your region, just their 2021 prices, and you look at Williston, the little check box would be where your rates would be in 2022. Now remember, everybody else's rates have went up by 7 to 15% as well. So in essence, you're gonna stay positionally right where you were, which is the lowest cost in the region. So we all understand, and everybody hates it. We know Florida families are hurting. Families around the United States are hurting every time they go to the gas pump. We understand that. Everybody does. We work hard. Your team works hard to try to keep costs low. But again, you got to eventually take care of the goose that's going to lay the golden eggs for this community. So with that, I don't know how you want to. Do you want questions now?
Well, I know one of the first questions that I asked when I saw this slide was, what does 8.90% equate to? And what it equates to on a 1,000 kilowatt hour, which is a normal household per month, it amounts to $8.90 a month. So that 8.9% increase sounds really bad. But when you consider that it's only $8.90 to get us where we need to be. And that's one of the things we all said. It needs to be a small jump, not something huge, or we will not, we can't do it. Our residents can't handle it. But $8.90, once they finally got down to what is the 8.9% on a 1,000 kilowatt house. And I looked at my house, it was 9.53 kilowatts, 953 kilowatts last month. So it was a little less than $8.90 a month that my bill would have gone up. Then that was easier for me to swallow, knowing what we need to do with that money. And then when I saw the next years, and that the fact that it would not go up that much again, that made me happy too. So not happy, obviously, but the fact that it needs to be done.
Yeah, Michael.
So you talked about the poles and the cost. Roughly, say 5 years ago, what was with the poles and the cost? Just say an average.
Yeah, I don't know, but you guys, I don't remember back.
I don't have the information, but I can get it to you.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
15, 20.
5 years ago, what was the price versus what we're gonna pay now?
I mean, it certainly escalated, but not like energy, not like steel and aluminum. The wood poles have stayed. And remember, the wood poles.
12% is what you're.
12%, yeah, 12%. And
Whatever.
remember, the wood poles are poles that rot.
Right.
So one of the questions that you deal with when you talk about infrastructure in the city is maybe the main circuits for the city, that you upgrade them to something more than wood, not every pole in the city.
That was gonna be the next question.
Yes.
Is
You look at steel or concrete poles on some of the main circuits. I mean, those are things you could do. But the wood poles are up 12% over the last 4 or 5 years.
So if it was $100, it's now $112.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's a big comparison.
Right. I don't know what.
It's probably a whole lot more than that. What is the whole cost us right now? Danny, you're back there. You have the idea?
So I want to say it's 260.
260.
260 a pole?
You hear that,
Yeah.
Mike?
That's for a 40-foot pole.
Yeah.
That's 55.
40 foot poles are about $260.
$65. I can get you that exact quote.
Just
So they've gone up about
just so we
$50.
understand, when we're looking at.
Now, 5 years ago, I wasn't in a position for that. I can get, I can find out what they paid.
All right, any questions at this particular time for Mr. Williams? Yeah, just for Mr. Williams, let's do that now, and then we'll let Stephen go. If you've got something for that on his slide presentation. You can always ask him later if you've got something for that on his slide presentation. You can always ask him later too. Okay. we'll
Would
try.
y'all use your mics, please? We
Go
can't hear
ahead.
you.
Is your mic on? We can't hear you.
We can't hear you at all.
It's way down there too far. Pull it up.
Go up higher.
There you go. It's definitely on. Sorry, I thought it was on. Now I hear you. So, see, that's too loud.
That's good.
So when, I took a look at the presentation, I asked the question, was there a way for you to give us a, breakdown of how much it was for the residents who had gas versus those who did not have gas?
We looked at some of that, and in fact, the team provided, and it was a very small difference. If I remember looking at those, because they looked at customers who had versus didn't have.
And I know we pulled the gas out of this workshop because we weren't ready for it, we didn't have all those numbers yet, so that.
I mean, you gotta remember, most houses where they use most of their electricity is air conditioning.
I'm sorry.
The houses, most of the electricity in Florida is used to run the air conditioner, right? So whether you have gas or not, that's irrelevant. It only matters in the wintertime for, a couple months when you might run the heater. Otherwise, your cooking is really not much. And so if you may have a water heater, but your air conditioners are the big users of electricity in everybody's house here in Florida.
So no concrete numbers that you can give us.
I think the difference was, in a house without was probably $10 to $15 less. It wasn't meaningfully different.
In the summer at least. It's
Yeah, in the
way
summer,
different in the winter.
yeah, in the wintertime, there's that month or two where it's different, but in the summer, there's
Because
almost.
I'm one of those. I have, natural gas for my heater, my fire, my hot water heater, and my stove. Right, so because the people that they were comparing were people who had gas.
And in fact, I would say, because gas prices have doubled, your natural gas bills have actually went up far more than your electric bills on a percentage basis this year over last. Because it's the same natural gas that you use in your home that is used in the power plants.
Are we ready for Mr. Blue? Mr. Goodman, sorry.
I know that this,
If you will, can you come to this microphone?
I will be happy to come forward and bring him to. Nope, I guess I'll come to it.
I think.
Remember, I'm old, it'll take me a minute.
It's all right, you're gonna bring it to, well,
Don't need all that. I know, am I close enough now? Hello?
You speak loud, go ahead.
I do speak loud, don't I?
Go ahead.
Okay. I know that this rate increase is from staff, not from you, correct?
Correct.
And what we actually are looking at by 2026 is a 15.2% increase, correct? Is that correct? Okay, so while we're talking 8.9 this year, by 2026, the suggestion that this council is going to be looking at is an increase, total increase of 15.2%. Is that accurate, council?
Which would be $15 instead of $8.90, yes.
I understand. I'm looking at percentages.
Right.
Because we're focusing on 8.9, but in reality, what you're considering is 15.2 by 2026. Okay, I just needed to be clear.
And we would obviously take that 1 year at a time.
Yes, I see your graph, but it's important if you're deciding that everybody understands that you're deciding for the future too. So you're talking about deciding to raise it to 15.2% by 2026.
Right now, we're talking 1 year.
Is that all you're talking? You're not talking about all these other projections this time?
As far as I'm concerned, that's what we're talking about.
Well, it would be interesting to know what the whole council is.
If that is so
Next year, we're gonna talk about another one.
That's what my question
That's what
is.
I'm saying.
Councilor.
If the way natural gas is going now, it could be more than 1.2%.
So I'm going to ask the question a different way.
That's why.
Are you only concerned with this year's 8.9%, or are you considering all of these as the staff recommendation says?
I'm considering 1 year for down. I don't know what they are presenting.
For me, it was from 22 to 26 when we had our discussion.
Okay, so clearly the council needs to get together and decide what it is they're deciding.
I
That's all
don't
I'm
think we
saying.
can decide for 2023 without knowing
Thank
how
you.
much the fuel cost goes up in that year. We would have to reassess it. Would you agree with that?
Correct, but when I asked the question, I said the same question that he did, and that was the same statement.
I did.
That yes,
I didn't understand that you asked that question.
I did.
Okay, I didn't understand.
So I mean, it was the exact same thing. Over this period of time, we're actually going to have a 14-15% rate increase, and the answer was yes.
I didn't understand that that's what you asked. And I didn't hear an answer that said yes. Did I miss that somewhere?
That wasn't here.
Oh, I was trying to say, I didn't hear that either.
That was when they gave me
Okay.
an individual presentation, and asked that question.
Excuse me.
Would somebody go please find the vacuum cleaner and tell me?
It's not air conditioning.
That's the air conditioner.
It's air hammers.
So, all right, is staff making any comment here? No? Okay.
I'm happy to clarify.
If you will. I mean, you have to do it year to year, because you don't know what the fuel cost is gonna be.
Exactly.
That's the way I look at it.
That's exactly right.
We're in the utility business, and that requires us to monitor every year how well we're doing, so that we don't get where we are now. So what happens is we have a lot of outside influence, and the numbers you're seeing now were generated in November. And you see what's happened since November and now. We've had a lot of changes in the outside world, right? That's fair to say. So for us to lock in would be foolish, because we'd be making promises we can't keep. We need to be able to be in the utility business and make it a business to where we monitor it. We make sure that our capital needs are covered, so that if a tree comes down or we have an outage, that it's not going to escalate our costs. We're forward thinking. That's going to minimize our costs as we grow. That's what we're trying to do. So each utility is being analyzed to make sure we operate our business the way we're supposed to. This is what, in a perfect world, if everything goes well, we hope this is what it's going to look like, or even lower. But we can't say that because it's ever changing. So we'll visit this again to make sure that we're doing good business. So that's really all I needed to say, is I hate to make a promise we can't keep. But we're gonna try our best with our resources and with FMPA to make good decisions as we go forward and bring you good information for you to make good decisions. So that's all I did.
And that's fine. I mean, everybody just needs to understand and be on the same page. You should have people thinking different things. So thanks for that information, clarification.
Yeah, excellent question. All right, anything else from Mr. Williams before we move to Mr. Blunt? You can always come back.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening.
Let me just say one more thing before he gets started for the audience. Every time you hear him say, transfer to the general fund, every time you hear him say that, the general fund is the police department, the fire department, roads and streets, and parks. If it's anybody else, I'm not quite sure, but
And all
those,
the rest of administration.
and that's pretty much it. So when you hear him talking about utility revenue being transferred to general fund, you're talking about transferring it to police, fire, roads and streets, and parks. And that's just, I want you to keep that in mind when you hear him say that.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Bloom. I am the finance director, and please let me know if you can hear me, okay? So I'm gonna go through a couple slides here for you. Some of this will be repeat if you were here on Tuesday. And then I'm gonna talk a little bit about the budget. And then my last slide, which is my favorite slide, will actually show kind of the cost for purchase electricity in 2017 versus now. It's a very good trend to be able to show you. Okay, so the utility fund right now, and these are some of the financial results for January that we just presented. So basically through January, the utility fund broke even. That's without capital projects, that's without anything. $810 is what the utility fund made. That's after the transfer to the general fund, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So in that regard, again, breaking even is not bad. It is actually pretty good for fast. Let's go. That was good. That was great.
That wasn't quick.
That was really quick. You said you wanted it quick. For the utility fund. And then long term. Most of the time when I'm presenting financials, I'm talking about how are you doing against your current year budget. Like for example, through January, not too bad, $810, you're breaking even. But I also wanted to take a look at the longer term, because that's really more what we're talking about today as you look forward with your utility rates. And basically what's going to affect that. You heard quite a bit list of what's going to be affecting you. In the short term, even though that you broke even, one thing to keep in mind is that you have quite a bit of open positions. And I did some quick calculations, and it's about $113,000. So that means if you were fully staffed at this moment in time, you would not be breaking even. You would be basically have a deficit of about $113,000. So again, open positions are always a part of operations, but that means projects are not being done. Things that the city needs to get done are not being done. So that's kind of where you are now. Breaking even is not bad, but you have to make sure you understand the why behind that. Now, long term, again, for the utility fund, you've already heard this, but it is worth repeating. If you're breaking even every year, you're not going to be able to do your infrastructure. You're not going to be able to do some of those significant projects that you talked about. And then again, other things that you have to deal with, rising costs of material. Obviously, that's a huge factor. And then we talk about it quite a bit at the last set of budget workshops. Salary compression and employee turnover are key issues that the utility fund is facing. And now this is a slide that I always present during the financial review. And again, obviously we're talking about electric here. But when you look at the bottom line, which is the net income, which is green, the only utility that is making money is the electric right now. Gas, water, and solid waste to a much smaller degree, and sewer are not making money. So that means that not only is electric having to give to the general fund, but right now the electric is also working to support some of these other services. When we did the budget, when we went through the budget, it is important to note that the utility fund was budgeted this year to use about $300,000 of operating cash reserves to fund the operating. That's not capital. That means that even if you were to use everything, do everything you decided to do for the budget, you would still have to use $300,000 of your cash reserve because your revenue is not generating enough. And that is basically to cover all of your staff, materials, everything that needed to get done throughout the year. So basically, in looking at this, that's why it's important that you got to make sure not only once you get past this year that you're able to make up some of that shortfall in the revenue. We talked quite a bit about the transfer, and you've heard about those numbers. So I wanted to make sure I showcase what that means. So currently in this year's budget, the utility fund is going to transfer about $900,000 to the general fund. Without that number, obviously, that would have to be covered some way else. And certainly, property taxes would have to be increased, or services would have to be changed. So when we go through our budget workshop, for those of you who happen to be there, normally when we have these discussions, they'll ask me, well, how are you going to fund this? If you add this or want to add this, or if you want to purchase a car, how are you going to fund that? And when we start the budget process up until a point, I usually tell them there's three options. You're going to either have to increase your taxes, or you're going to have to increase the transfer from the utility fund, or you're going to have to either change your service level or basically move it from a different line. And that's part of when you're having these discussions, you got to keep in mind when you get back into another budget workshop, which is actually not too far off. When you're looking at those same line items, it's only you're going to have to pull it from somewhere. So this is basically one of your three options when you're looking at your electric system to hopefully be able to do a small increase. If not, unfortunately, when you go to do your budget and you start getting your requests, you have to start looking at your infrastructure. You've got to start replacing vehicles. You have to make sure that you're keeping your staff at the current market rates. Unfortunately, you're going to have to find that revenue from somewhere. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do tonight is lay that out for everyone to make sure they understand. You hear your options, pick one, and then kind of let's make sure we've got a plan moving forward. So when you're having these discussions, that's why we are keeping the general fund. Even though your general fund is separate from your utility fund, obviously when you're transferring $900,000, it's got to be a part of the decision. Okay, so one of the things we've talked about, obviously with increases, it's important to kind of keep an historical perspective on where the electric utility has gone. So I put together this chart, and the one thing I did want to correct is this is by calendar year, and not by fiscal year. That's important because the new contract actually starts on January 1 of each year, and I wanted to make sure I was doing, comparative. So in 2017, and I know there's a lot of numbers on this, in 2017, it costs 0.062 per kilowatt hours for anyone who was, using electricity. And basically over time, and we've talked about this briefly up until now, it's now only costing 0.048 cents. So the cost to the residents, and 100% of that savings goes right back to the residents right now. To the ratepayers. That's not kept by the city. So 100% of that is going back. So that means if you were using 1,000 kilowatt hours, and I did some rough numbers, it would have cost you. It's going to cost you less now by about $168 of savings between 2017 to 2021. You would have saved about $168 on electricity, and nothing else would have gone up for you. Meaning all of the base rates for the city for electricity stayed the same during that time period. So that's in essence 100% savings back to the ratepayers. And I thought that was important as we're having this discussion to be able to showcase that the city has done a very nice job of trying to reduce the contract. And that's basically what the city pays for that purchase power. And that's basically all I wanted to cover.
Thank you, Mr. Blaine. Any questions for Mr. Blaine?
Can I follow up a little bit with
Yes,
that,
ma'am.
please?
If you don't, write it on there.
This one?
Yes, ma'am, please. Since you don't have your own, I'm surprised.
Stephen, would you explain? We understand when we purchase our bulk power, that goes straight to the consumer. So when they get their bill, the way we did this is the fluctuation is not going to affect them. So it's pretty steady rate, whether it goes way high, way low. The base rate only includes enough to cover maintenance. We have no capital coming back out of any of our electric bills that's going to help us with our capital. That's our issue. Am I right?
That's right. So
I'm trying to break this down a little bit.
So if you look at the left hand here, that is your base rate. And a portion of that, not the whole thing, a portion of that stays with the city and is used to cover overhead, fixed costs, personnel, capital improvements, everything. And then on the right side, you have your purchase power cost.
Right.
So if that goes way down, that goes right back to the ratepayers.
That's right.
The city does not save anything, does not keep it, 100% goes back. That's the way it was designed and that's the way it runs. The other side of that though is obviously when fuel goes up, then it goes up. And that's when you keep hearing the purchase power cost adjustment factor. You might see it on your bills and wonder, what are they doing? That's what that is. That's a factor to make sure that 100% of what it costs the city to purchase power is going either back to the ratepayers or is being recovered.
So when you step back and you look at the years that we've been able to let our customers save on the electric, we have been taking from the electric fund to for other utilities and for operations in the general fund, and not saved for any capital. That's important for everyone to understand why we're doing it. So if we were only in the business for electric includes staff, it includes vehicles, it includes personnel, it includes overhead. It includes the price of purchasing the power. If we were only in the electric business, that's the methodology for our rate would be to take all those expenses, add on any future capital probably for 5 years, and that would determine our rate. There's a methodology for that going to determine the rate. So we get enough revenues back in to cover our expenses if we were in the electric business.
That's correct.
We're doing that with every utility we have. So when you saw that slide up there, we have other utilities that's operating in the red that the electric fund is covering. It's so important for everybody to see this because for years we've operated that way. And when we got together with our staff and we started analyzing this, we realized in a few years, we would not have enough money coming back from our electric, from our rates to support anything. Police and fire wouldn't have anything. Any non-revenue generating program we had would have to go away. So we're in recovery. And when I say that word is, we sat down and we methodically tried to figure out how understanding what's going on in the outside world, how to balance that so it doesn't hurt our citizens so badly, because we realize gas is going up. We can't hit them with all the rates, but eventually you're going to see other rate studies come before you, because the less the electric fund has to support other rates, the more that's going to go towards our capital for our poles, for our any of our materials and supplies we need. So not only are we facing a problem with our capital, but it's, how long does it take to get our poles now? How far out?
We don't know that for sure, about 6 months.
About 6 months. How much for our transformers? 2 years. So when we have new development coming in, we need inventory so that we can meet these needs. And we do not have that. So fortunately, we're trying to work with the other people that's part of our membership with FMPA that we're trying to barter with to help us during and hope to God we don't have a major crisis. So I just needed to break that down a little bit more so everybody understood that this is not something that just happened. This has happened over the past many years that we've never increased the rates. We've diminished our capital because it supported other operating expenses. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that. Thank you.
Mr. Cox, go ahead.
No, the other day when we did this presentation, you said there was a tree that took down power lines. How many poles was that?
I can't hear.
Yeah, you need, aren't your mic on? Yeah, it's okay. Start over.
So when I sat in with the presentation, I talked to Donald, and we had the discussion about poles, and the lack of inventory. And we talked about if we have a disaster, hurricane come through, poles getting wiped out. And they had mentioned the other day that they had a tree, I believe it was, that came down, took down lines, and it took 3 power poles with it.
8 houses. 8 houses. On 7.
So,
7 on 7.
Based upon our inventory that we have now, or very little, we would be hurt in a big storm.
This is correct. It was 3 poles, 1 transformer, and half the town, well, I would say probably 2/3 of it was out of power during that outage. So it's not only the cost of the poles and the material, we also had the outage. It was not gaining any revenue back from the outage, so you gotta count that in with it. So
So how many poles do we have now?
on hand, I'm hoping to get that stocked up. That's what I'm working on right now. We have probably 15 to 20, and that's varying sizes depending on what's all.
These are wood poles.
Yes, yes, sir.
So we have some nice neighbors that help us when we need
Yes.
supplies.
Yeah, GRU has stepped in and helped us a whole lot, but I just made a call to them a couple weeks ago, and they can't help us with no transformers right now. City of Ocala is no for transformers.
How many transformers do you have at the moment? On hand?
On hand, an average of 2 per size.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we had it, there varies on sizes, that's all we ever had in the past, so. I'm trying to build our inventory because the city is building so fast, so. We have to take account for that.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not picking on you guys.
Yeah.
So really, in the past, they just haven't built our inventories up.
Right. It's
Before you
always
guys.
been 2 to 3 have on hand, and right now it's down to 2.
Not for,
We
weren't proactive.
correct.
Mr. Wallace, you have something to add?
I just happened to stand up.
Okay, that's making sure. That's something you get up, I was making sure. I know you do inventory.
I'll add Mike's comments later on.
Keep up the good work with what you got. Appreciate it.
I have a question. Where did that come from? Okay, thank you.
I mean, I know this is the utility, but I mean, we're talking about increasing the electric, but are we looking at increasing water? I'm not really sure about the sewer portion of it, if you can increase that. Have you guys looked into those things as well to increase? That way we don't have to, the utility fund doesn't have to, bear the burden for all these things. And they can start, I know you're working with gas, but I haven't heard anybody talk about water or solid waste or sewer or anything like that.
They are working on it.
Yes, we're trying to do this methodically, so it's not such an impact on our citizens. The next thing you're gonna see is our gas workshop, because it's really in the red, and we've got to do a little better job. I can tell you, we've been asked, a lot of people would like gas extended to their neighborhoods, and so we're working with, for example, we don't mandate it in our code right now that people that are new development have to have gas. So we negotiated with Country Lane Estates, because we knew we didn't have any hammers to make them put it in. And as a result of that, they got with their buyers. Florida Gas Utilities met with the developer and said, if you'll build your houses to be gas compatible, we'll put in the lines ourselves. And over probably, it's gonna take about 3 to 5 years, but we're gonna have almost 100 people on our gas utility. So we're working behind the scenes to try and catch up, plan forward and think forward. So you're gonna be seeing that gas utility rate study come next, probably in a month or so. We'll be looking at that. We're gonna wait a little bit. We're gonna be analyzing our sewer and our water as we go, because if we're in the business, we have to make sure we're doing good business. And that's gonna take that drain off of our electric utility. My staff said to please remind everybody, right now we have $23,000 in contingency, and that's one accident. That would cover an outage. If we had a tree down or another power pole hit, we have to use our transfer, then we can't get another one for a couple of years. We've got to get our inventory built up, but we have nothing in our funds now to start stocking for any emergencies, and that's our goal. So we're trying to balance, this is a balancing act, and know that we're very sensitive to it. Did that answer you, Ms. Darkness?
It is, thanks. Any other questions for Mr. Blank? Mr. Webb?
I don't have a microphone.
I'm starting to think if you come to the microphone, please, so everybody else can hear you.
Is that $23,000 contingency for electric? Is that what we're talking about?
That's in utility fund, yes, sir. In the utility fund.
And utility, so that's for all
Is it just electric or all?
It's all of
Just
them.
electric.
It's all of
Yeah,
them.
all of them.
of them. But now you have two different answers. Which one?
It's just, I'm gonna ask Mr. Blank.
Yeah, let me clarify. The 23,000 is for the entire fund. After everything else was budgeted, all revenue, all expense, including staffing, projects and everything, the only thing left over was $23,000 this year for as a contingency for the utility fund.
This year, being 21, 22.
Correct.
That's pretty low.
It is pretty low.
Any other questions for Mr. Blank? Yes, ma'am. If you will, come to the microphone. And if you will, because there's a recorder sitting right there, state your name correctly.
Donna Hatcher, I own a business in town. Nothing's been said about the commercial utilities, which we do pay a little bit more than residential. Is there gonna be an increase on that?
Let's staff decide how, I mean, is it gonna be across the board?
I did ask that question this afternoon, and after I was asking at lunch today, at the chamber
Yeah.
meeting.
Let me clarify the question for staff.
All right.
When you increase the base rate, is the plan to increase it across the board for all account types? Yes, it is.
And there's still the $8.90 per 1,000 kilowatt. It'll be the same for commercial and residential. That's what I was told when I asked the question after lunch.
So 1,000 kilowatt typically doesn't go above 1,000 kilowatt. Is that what you're saying?
A typical house roughly only runs around 1,000 kilowatts.
Yeah, it's on average, you know, just like any average.
Some houses are smaller, some are bigger, but and your usage was different according to your appliances and things, but.
If I could help clarify, the Public Service Commission for, they don't regulate your rates here, city council regulates, but when you make changes at the city, you have to file them with the Public Service Commission. And the one question they ask is, are you treating each rate category essentially the same? What they don't want is say, hey, we're gonna save the businesses, or we're gonna save the residential and everybody else goes up. So that's the one question. That's why the answer is yes. Unless you have a really great reason as to why. That's the one question they ask. They won't say whether you should or shouldn't, just make sure they're even.
So go home and look at your bill and see how many kilowatts you used in last month's bill, whether it's a business or your residence, and then you'll know. That's what I did. I had to go home and do that. But that bill you just paid should show you. And if you can look at your bill and you can't figure it out, sometimes it's a little bit hard, come up here and they'll help you interpret it. Anything else for right now? If not, we'll have just a general discussion. Thank you, Mr. Blake. All right, so again, we have questions. If there's anyone else who has a question or something that's on their mind that pertains to this electric utility rate, here are the experts you can ask. Mr. Goodman, come on down.
So I think I understand, but since there was some confusion earlier, I just want to be clear on what the council is considering. If you're in a business, your rates are higher than a residence. Is that accurate?
Yes,
Okay,
the formula.
it's a formula. I just want to be clear.
They're telling me no.
They just use more power, most businesses.
Okay, because what I just heard was businesses' rates are higher.
No, it was straight across the board, what they said.
That is exactly my question. We're talking straight across the board. What someone just said is that businesses pay a higher rate than residents. Is that consumption based?
So the formula is exactly the same for residential as it is for commercial. There's I mean,
I just needed clarity because I heard two different things.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Okay.
I needed clarity as well. I know my house and my business is a whole lot more, and I have a small business. My business is a whole lot more than my house. It's probably 6 times higher than my house. But it uses a lot of electricity. It's got 3-phase power, and it's using it. So yes, I'll have to go home and look at that bill and see how many kilowatt hours I use there. And I did not look at that one. Anybody else have a question? As I said, we've got all the experts sitting here.
I've got a question, probably a simple question, and it may have already been answered. What can the average taxpayer in the city of Williston expect to get on their bill? I know it's based on kilowatt hours, but what would be about the average that their bill would go up?
I'm told that it's $8.90 for an average residence.
$8.90.
Obviously, the businesses, including mine, use more than 1,000 kilowatts.
Yeah.
But I'm told that the 8.9%, because it's at 1,000 kilowatts, it rounds right up to $8.90.
So Councilman Ross, your specific question is, what does the average person use every month in kilowatts?
Basically.
The average rate in Williston is 950 kilowatts. So it's lower than the 1,000 that we projected on.
Okay.
If you use 1,000 kilowatt hours, it'll be $8.90 or 30 cents a day on a 30-day month. And the reality is that most people use less than that.
Yeah.
So we calculated it at about 27 cents a day.
Okay, thanks, sir.
Appreciate that. And to me, the money explains it better than the percentage, because the percentage is just like, oh my gosh, 8.9%. But when I can say
Yeah,
$8.90.
of war.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It sounds a whole lot better to know that and I know $8.90 is a lot to some people.
That's 2 gallons of gas.
Yeah.
There'll be one next week.
Yeah, we're lucky. You're exactly right, Donna. But it's better to hear $8.90 than it is 8.9%, even though it amounts to exactly the same thing. And the way I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, because I may not understand it correctly. In years past, we have billed our customers what our power has cost us. And that we have not put away, and we've transferred to the general fund for all those things that don't make money, that we need as a city to have. To be the city we enjoy being. Because what would we be without our fire department, other than higher insurance rates? What would we be without our police department? What would we be without our parks? What would we be without our streets and sidewalks? We would be in the county on a dirt road. Those are the things we live here for. And I feel like that's worth paying an extra $8.90 for, or $8.50, whatever it happens to be. As I said, my house is less than 1,000 kilowatt hours. And we've got to, we can't just bill, we can't continue to just bill the cost of the power. We've got to add in the capital that we need to replace the power, the power poles, to get the transformers, to get the wire that we need for the new subdivisions, for all those things that we need to have on stock that we don't currently have. We haven't been putting the capital. And where we have the labor cost, we have those employees in our budget, but we have not been able to get a second crew. We had a second crew for this long. We were able to get another lineman. Mike was able to hire a second line crew. It didn't last very long, maybe a month. And they were hired away from us at a higher salary. So we have one line crew. Mike's out there working himself to death with his crew. We need that second crew there. That lineman and that ground crew is in our budget. We have not been able to recruit and hold that person. That's something we've got to have the money to do. And so we can't just continue to buy power and sell it back at the cost that we buy it for. And that's what we've been doing. If I understand correctly, if I'm wrong, please say so. Ms. Hines?
Question. Because I always look at my electric bill, but I don't understand it. So when you gotta talk about the bulk power, because there's like two different numbers or prices, that's on there. When you're talking about the bulk, which one is that? And, yeah. Because I mean,
It's the whole amount.
The bulk power is the cost of buying power from us today.
The whole big amount.
So about 60%, the bigger number is usually the bulk power. That's the bigger number, about 60% of your cost, give or take. Then there's 40%, which is the recovery of operations and all the other. But the bulk power rate is for the cost of power that comes from us, and that moves with natural gas.
and the other amount is how much I actually used.
No, they're both times how much you actually use, but they split the prices in half, or there's a, I
To
don't
be
know.
the fuel adjustment.
She's asking, so on our bill, we show the kilowatt hour
Right.
usage,
Right.
and there's a rate for that, and then there's a power cost adjustment, and I think that's your question.
Right. They're both on the same amount of kilowatt hours, but one is for the purchase of power adjustment, the other is for the base rate.
Right,
Yeah,
and that's
one's
what
the
that was
power
for.
adjustment.
So one is a purchase.
Right,
Okay. And one's the adjustment that goes up and down. That one goes up and down.
again, that one that goes up and down is your purchase.
Well, that's based on consumption.
No.
It's based on fuel.
Fuel costs.
No,
Well, the
you're,
bulk is based on consumption.
the bulk power is the one that adjusts.
Okay. But
Your
does it
base
show that
rate
way on
is
our
the
bill?
one that does not adjust.
I know it does, but I'm not sure it shows that way on our bill.
Yeah.
Base rate is constant,
Right,
never change.
yes. And the fuel
Because the
adjustment goes
bulk
up and
rate
down.
goes up and down because of the cost.
Right.
But they're both calculated on usage.
On the same amount of consumption.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that was a question, because I didn't understand. I'm like, why am I paying for that and this? I'm not.
One's paying for the power and one's paying for all the services the city provides.
So when we purchase in bulk, it is divided amongst the citizen to actually pay for it.
It's taking all the power you buy, divided by how many kilowatt hours, and that's the cost.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
And it's cheaper to buy it in bulk from them. That's why we contract 60%, I hear you say. I've forgotten that amount. But
I was just curious, I always see it.
And oh my heavens, if we had stayed with Duke, our energy rate would be astronomical.
If we had who?
If we had stayed with Duke Power, which is where we were before, our power rates would be unbelievable now. If you look at they're really high. All right, ladies and gentlemen, anything else?
Well,
Mr. Cox, sorry.
So as we prepare for our future, you talked about steel and concrete poles. So you're saying your recommendation would be the main trans, the main lines be steel and concrete for the other poles and eliminating the wood?
You want to have a plan. And in the plan, you want to look and see what are the poles that you just do not want to go down. Okay, and there are main feeders, and not all the way to the end of the line, but your main feeders coming right on the substations that feed the downtown. If you lose them, you lose everything. You got to ask yourself, do you get them steel or concrete? Or do you get bigger wood? But bigger wood just means they're still, yeah. But you can't do it all at once, so you gotta say, okay, how many poles, maybe you do one circuit this year, another, it may come down to you do 20 or 30 poles this year and 20 or 30 poles next year. That's the kind of plan that the utility needs to put in place. And then that way you kind of know what your costs are and you see, okay, can we still afford it? You make that decision each year. Can we afford another 20 poles for this next year? But you have them ordered, you've got a plan, and that's where I know Jackie wants to get a 5-year plan in place to know what needs to be done.
Are you still gonna run into the same issue with getting, those type of
demolition too.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you get a concrete one quicker than you can get a wooden one?
That's the thing you have to look at. I mean, right now, we are short because of coming out of COVID. And energy prices so high, the world slowed down producing everything. 2 years from now, that we may be a different place, but we don't know. But right now, that's where we're at. So that's why you need a plan, and then you need to adjust according to what's actually available and how much you can spend. Right.
I hear I see Mr. Bishop saying too. If you want to unhook that, we can pass it around.
No, that's fine. Every pole has a lifespan and every pole has a wind rating. So when you start talking concrete versus wood versus steel, they all cost different prices, but they all come with different wind loads and they all come with different lifespans. So wood is the quickest, cheapest, easiest way to get us out of trouble, but then we'll go right back in where we're at. And then you'll change your wooden poles out 4 to 5 times more, if you will, a concrete. And you'll change your concrete out 2 to 3 times more than you would a steel. So the initial investment is god awful, but your maintenance cost is lower. When you look at it from day to day, the other poles are better, but then I have to convince you to spend 9 times the price for a pole.
Well, if we're gonna plan for the future, we need to do it right.
And that's what we're doing, and that's why we're here, so.
I'm gonna segue back to the 5-year plan and how often we're gonna look at these rates. Now, you already heard that we need a program in place for our poles. You've already heard that we need to get our inventory so that we don't get in trouble if we blow a transformer, if we have a storm. Right? My staff has come up with a preliminary 5-year plan based on absolute necessities, that something that they absolutely have to have. Because again, we're in recovery, we're training to be forward thinkers, so that what we do now will make an impact on the future, so they won't be going through the same thing we're going through now. So we're trying to plan well. Now I'm gonna start with Lamar, our fire chief. What is the main thing that you have to have at this budget, for this next budget?
The main thing that I'm gonna, can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
The main thing that I'm gonna have to have in the next budget cycle is new air packs.
It's what?
New air packs. The backpacks that go on our back. Just so you know, we have 35. Without the extra equipment that comes with them, they're $7,000 a piece.
Top vehicle.
The tanker truck for the City of Williston Fire Department is going out of service in a year and a half. It'll be 25 years old. The replacement truck that I got a rough quote today is close to $500,000. The squad truck, we kicked the can down the road 2 years in a row. That's $50,000.
Thank you.
So I can keep going.
Guess how much?
I'm trying to paint a picture.
I'm sorry.
Because what's happening now.
Wait a minute, the squad truck was 60,000?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's cheaper than I thought it would be.
Yeah, well, we were just getting a chassis and putting our old equipment
Okay, gotcha.
on it.
I knew it was cheaper for
Yeah.
a reason.
We're highlighting is all.
Right.
Chief Stroud, what is your main need for this next year?
Retire.
We're all very jealous of that.
Actually, Deputy Chief Bavard and the new chief is working on this, and they've got quite a detailed thing. I'll let him present it, because they're gonna be hearing for it in the future.
I can real quick, so I'll go.
I mean, you don't have to present the whole thing tonight. if you don't
Just
want.
give me a highlight.
I'm not. I'm basically, we're a little different in the sense of like, we can't say, hey, we need a fire truck and that's gonna make your ISOs a little better and it's gonna keep our insurance rates down. There's a lot of things that govern what we do and how we do things. A lot of things that we compare ourselves to as far as like how well we do our job. Obviously our response time is pretty important. Our crime rate is pretty important. And then there's another thing we don't talk about a lot is that our officer to citizen ratio. Okay, so right now we're sitting at 4.0 officers per 1,000 citizens, because we're about 3,000 citizens, we have 12 officers. So that plays into the big factor of what we do. So we want to kind of keep around that 4.0 area, which is really good for our response time and how we provide service. So Next year going forward, if we're talking about just 1 year and nothing changes, in other words, Ghost Town doesn't come online, no other citizens come to Williston, other than the average 30 that we normally get per year, we're gonna need cars, right, like we normally do, and we'll probably be able to get by with a couple extra personnel. Staffing's a big issue for us. We're looking at 2 personnel next year, 2 officers and maybe 2 dispatchers, and probably could go by with 1. So that's really what we're looking at for year 2. Everything else that we need, as we move down the road and all these other big subdivisions come online, increases that number of citizens here, right, in Williston, okay? And then basically that ratio per officer starts to go down, and it starts to affect some of the things that we do and the way we respond to where we go, right? So we don't want to drop down the 2.1 officers per 1,000 citizens, because then our response times go up, crime rates go up, a bunch of other things, right? Now, we know that 5 years from now, when 4,000 people come to this city, realistically, adding $1.4 million to the Williston Police Department budget is probably not acceptable, okay, right? But if you want to stay in that 4.0 ratio and put the cars on the road and keep the equipment up, I mean, those are kind of the numbers you're talking about. Can we get by with less? Yeah, and we're in discussion with the new chief of how we can do that and what we can do to move forward. So if we're talking 1 year, we talking 1 year?
Right, for now.
For now, we're talking 2 cars, 2 police officers, 1 dispatcher clerk, right? And then plus, there's going to be an increase in everything we do. We are not like the fire department. We don't sit at the fire department. We drive around, right? So there's a lot of increases associated with that. And as you know, we dropped our cars off last year. So we're going to need to add the 2 cars.
The other key thing, that we're so far behind on the salary. And I think Terry's done some basic decision on that, is that we are so far out of the ballpark, we can't even entertain candidates right now. We just lost one to the city of Bellevue for $9,000 more than he was making here.
So an example the chief's talked about, to bring our police officers up to where they need to be, it's going to be about $19,000 a year just for the officer. Actually, that's for the sergeants. Yes. About $11,000 a year just for the officers. And that's not taking into account compression and other things.
Right.
Promotion.
So you have a highlight from police and fire that is solely supported by our general fund, and that's, a lot of that comes from our electric utility. Public works, real quick. Top thing for the next year, what are you looking for?
Used work for 200,000 and new line truck for 280.
Right.
Repeat it. I can't hear it.
A squirt truck for 200 and a line truck for 280.
Okay, who am I missing?
Me.
Planning. I take your department, I look right over. I'm so sorry.
We always knew she was your favorite.
45-minute presentation.
Oh, man, we better not. You have to hear by yourself.
That's right, I forgot her. No.
So I'm one of the easier ones because I really don't have a lot of needs. But I do want to talk just a minute about compression. I did some calculations today, and our staff is going to go up in the next 5 years. Our salaries are going to go up 25%. And that's at the minimum. That's not giving them any extra for merits or for doing their job well. Also, we have an animal shelter coming on board. And I did some really, quick calculations to try to decide how much this is going to cost us. I have a lot of really great ideas to make it almost even, but the first year it's not going to happen. So we're talking about $4,000 to $4,500 a month to operate it. That's power, dog food, some salaries. That's part-time people. I'm trying not to overwhelm you with that kind of stuff, and lots of volunteers, because we're all volunteering. We're all going to help. But those things are going to have to happen. And there's going to be other things I didn't think of at the animal shelter yet. And we're going to try to offset as much as we can with grants and donations, and maybe we'll have adoption fees that are a little bit higher the first year, but I'm never going to be able to wipe out $4,500 a month with those things. So that's happening next year. So thank you. You're welcome.
So we're adding on one more division to community development. That's our animal shelter. I'm trying to paint a picture because when I say we're gonna have to revisit, we have to revisit our utilities so they stop drawing out of our electric fund. And we can start looking at all of our user fees to make sure that things pay for itself and that I'll give you an example. We build a brand new house, we put in a box for a water meter. We drop the meter. How much did the meter cost?
It went from 3 months ago at $210 to over $500.
It's over 500. What do we collect from the homeowner?
500. Now we haven't included staff, the tapping saddle, the labor, the staff and the equipment users.
So we're not getting back what we put in to provide for a brand new home. So just so everybody knows, we're analyzing everything. We've gone for every grant we can find to offset dollar per dollar what we need. This staff works all day very hard to try and keep our operating expenses low. I can tell you need to be proud of them because they really work hard. So I just wanted to paint the picture because come budget time, you're gonna have this bowl of money right here and there's a lot of need. When they talk compression, we're trying to meet a federal mandate by 2026 that the minimum wage is $15 an hour. So when that happens, everybody else has got to go up too. So we're trying to figure out how to do that. That's a challenge and that's huge. So these are all the challenges that we have as staff. What we're bringing to you is the very best we can with our electric utility right now, but we can't promise that's not gonna change. Outside forces change, dynamics change on material and supplies that we can't control. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that we're working hard for you. We wouldn't do this if we didn't have to. And we thank you for listening to all of it, and I think staff are taking the time on this.
So are you gonna increase the rate? Sorry, of those?
Add something up here to some questions that were addressed to Mike.
Okay.
I'm Danny Wallace. My position with the city is logistics manager, which is a glorified name for purchasing or scrounging or whatever. But one of the things you were asking about power poles, how far they're out. It's really great. We could have all the power poles in the world out there if we could get them in. But if we don't have the transformers to hang on them, it's useless. Right now, transformers, the average transformer, as Mike was saying, that's the pole mount transformer. That is right now like 54 weeks out. That's for a rebuilt one, not brand new. If you want a new one, it's even longer. The pad mount, we received paperwork here today or yesterday. They said, we can't even tell you. There's no timeline for it. We just don't, they're not out there. So, I mean, it's scary. The wire, overhead wire. We have had overhead wire ordered since May of last year. We're hoping to get it by June of this year. And it's even worse. As we start to order even more. And what's happening is that people have gotten back together. There's some growth going on. Everybody's ordering. Everything's back ordered. Parts they can't get. So, before it was all blamed on COVID. Now it's just they don't have the materials. Water meters, as we were talking about, they've gone up. We usually keep about 36 to 40 water meters complete. And that's everything that goes in it, the box, the meter, all the fittings. Right now, they're months out. We have a little thing that goes in that transmits called ERT. They're many months out. That goes with the water meter. They don't come from the same suppliers. We have to get them in we just have to shop. And for those, we can't shop. It's sole supplier for those type of meters. So when we get a development that we're looking at, they're talking to us, they're saying, hey, we're going to build this development. Then we hear things go down a little bit, nothing's said. And, for us to go out and buy all this material for this development, and we set it in our barnyard down there, and then something doesn't happen, what, everybody's gonna come in. We just spent $100,000 for this, another 50,000 here, and all this money. Then, now that they come in and say, well, we're gonna do it, it's not that we were caught short, but it's just the supply and the demand. So, if that's water, electric, sewer, just simple little fittings. I'm buying them, usually I'll buy like 25 or 30, and that lasts us for a few. Now I'm ordering 48 from this company, 48 from this, to see if I can just continue to get a trickle in. So, it's not a good thing right now. And try to be good stewards of the money, but, we're gonna have to try to get, materials in as much as we can, try to store them and have them there when it's ready. So that's a good outlay of money that's gonna be going out.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
All right, anything else from the public? Mr. Fuller, come on up.
You painted a picture tonight of why we need to do it. Now, I guess I'm looking at what's our path forward? Where do we go from here? Because this is just a workshop, so what's the next step that we take from here? Is the 890 a done deal, or?
That's the recommendation from the staff and from MSBA.
And so the path forward, where do we go from here? Does it go directly to council, for council to vote on that?
Yes. I assume it would have to be an ordinance or a resolution, ordinance by ordinance, to change the rate.
Or there might be resolution, we'll look.
I'm not sure which. It makes sense that it would be an ordinance, but I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, sir. Mr. Consent.
Real quick. So if the meters are going up, are we charging more to these new businesses that are coming in? Or are we not? We're just gonna stay?
Well, we're losing money currently. So right now in water, for example, since you asked about it, it takes us about 8 months to begin to make any money once a new service is put online. So one of the things we're gonna be presenting to council down the road when water and sewer studies come back is not a rate change for that, but a fee change. So that new development pays for that and not the citizens that are already here.
All right. Thank you.
And that was part of my question. We got 2 new developments that are on the books, and so if we're so stressed out and don't have supplies, how is that gonna affect that? Like, are we passing that on now to the new development? That's my question. I understand where we're at, so I'm just trying to find out.
Yes.
We're taking that into consideration when we're doing all this planning.
Yeah.
And we got enough poles to put up over there, we got enough transformers to put up over there.
Not yet.
So, that's my question.
It's a nail biter we're working on.
It is.
Anything else with Mr. Fuller? Come on back.
That last question raises an issue. Impact fees. And I know nobody likes to hear that, but somehow it is a treasure coming to Williston evidently because we're getting so many people in. But there should be some way to offset that because the current citizens should not bear a burden for people coming in. So the council needs to consider the potential.
Well, we put a moratorium on impact fees. What year was that?
Several years ago.
Probably 3
It
or 4
was
years.
March of 2014.
Thank you, God.
Thank you.
But I think an ordinance came after that took the moratorium away and stopped the impact fee, so it's not moratorium.
Yes.
We thought we could bring it back again.
Gotcha.
No.
Consider it.
So we have to start over again.
And we have it on our to-do list, trust me.
And this time, let's do it at a reasonable rate,
Absolutely.
not at a large rate that we had before that just killed any business that had to do
Well,
it.
economics would tell you that if the demand is so high, then you need to curb that or at least address that with cost.
When a developer is building the subdivision, it's easy to do because the developer pays, of course, they pass it on to their client. But it's hard with an individual person that's building a house. That becomes so hard for them.
It's hard on us when rates go up.
It is, but that,
And so-
it's really more of the capacity than it is, an impact fee boosts the capacity of the plant.
It's cost regardless.
It is, but.
And so
it's used
somehow
for a
that,
different reason, is what I'm trying to say.
yeah. So somehow that needs to be recovered and to continue to impact the citizens with people coming in. I think that somehow if it's of value to come to Williston, then somebody ought to be paying that value.
Because if we still had impact fees, Mr. Brew, how well would we be, we'd be better off.
Oh, sure.
Laura's here to tell you that.
But when you get an impact fee, you bank it.
Yep.
You don't really use it.
It's identified for a specific.
Yeah, you bank it for a specific service.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's not something that you use or that reduces the bill. It's real.
No, impact fees are specifically collected to pay for infrastructure for utilities
For the
or
future.
streets and roads. So that it wouldn't go back to the general fund typically, it would go straight to them so that they can make these improvements. And we have lost, in 2018, Scott had come and asked for impact fees to come back for 2017, and he had, I think it was about $1.7 million, $1.9 million that we had lost already. And we're going to lose a whole lot more now because we have a lot of developments coming. And at this point, we cannot do that to them because one of the reasons they chose us and they're in the process that they're in is because we didn't have impact fees. It's the number one question I get from developers. What are your impact fees? And when I say no, they kind of are shocked because we're one of the very few places in the state that don't have them.
But they're also vested, so we can't go.
Yeah, those guys are vested, so we can't go back and do that.
I forgot to charge.
We can't do that because we've already discussed
The
it,
way
but
I understand
As I
impact fees.
recall, we had the impact fees before,
yes, sir.
and we wound up giving them all the money back.
Yes, sir, you did. You gave about
So we didn't
$70,000.
accomplish anything by that move, except to create a lot more paperwork and do nothing.
Yeah, you did give them back, yes, sir. And I wasn't here then. I don't know exactly why you gave them back, but it was about $70,000 that you gave back.
I don't remember how much, but I was here, and I know it was voted 1, 2, 3,
Mhm.
but give it all to them.
Yep.
So those that had paid it in the first place, and there were quite a few of those.
So that's not something we're gonna address, this year probably, but we talk about it often. And we might address it for the next development, certainly when that starts to come up. So probably you'll see it in the next 15 to 18 months. And they won't be very high. And don't forget, that's a new house. It's a development. I mean, it's not something they're gonna pay multiple times.
Well, that's what I mean. The impact fee does not reduce the bill on the current customers. It makes a pool.
It'll make
For
a
the
pool
future.
so that they won't have to raise rates again
Right.
in 5 years.
Well, that's
We'll
what
have some money put
just
aside for that.
Mr. Fuller was asking.
Yeah,
It doesn't reduce the customer's bill.
And that's not the issue. The issue is that we want to make sure that infrastructure is taken care of.
Oh, yeah.
Right now, we've heard about infrastructure not being funded now.
that's true. I
And
realize that.
so we need to have a plan to make sure that that is taken care of.
Yes, sir.
We need to have a pool.
So the monies from the impact fee will go directly to utility to keep maintaining.
They would typically go to infrastructure,
Right,
roads,
just for utility
gas,
though.
water. Yeah,
Go-
it wouldn't really go back to like the planning department or permitting. It would go straight to them. And it would go into a pool, so
It
they
goes
could
into a pool and it's used as needed.
yeah, so they could buy poles if they needed them.
Understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
That's not accurate.
Okay,
When
that's
you
not
do
accurate.
impact fees by ordinance, you have to designate the fund for which they're going into. It can only be used for that.
Right, and it
Like,
was
example,
utility.
If you're paying for capacity at the plant, it has to go for the expansion of the plant.
Right.
If you're
Like a
if you're
sewer
paying
plant,
for
for
parks, it has to go for parks. If it goes for EMTs or emergency services, you must earmark it to go towards what you collected the people. Okay.
And that's something we can discuss too, is making the impact fees with the fire assessment and EMTs. They could all go at the same time, so that You don't have to keep doing this over and over. Impact fees. Jackie didn't.
So even just a single home would have an impact fee, not necessarily
Please
just the
restate that,
development.
Mr. Cox, I'm sorry.
Impact fees are for, so the developer pays for their own development, because they put that back into the cost of the house, right? And citizens that are existing already does not have to pay towards it. So you have to set it up to help with their park programs, or their EMT, if EMT.
So since they had voted to do away with impact fees from way back, we've lost a lot of money. So we've been sitting a lot prettier today, and not sitting in here, we'd be at home. If they had done away with it.
Yes.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
I have a motion, I have a second, we will adjourn at 7:40.